Julius Caesar did not cross the Rubicon with swords alone. He crossed it on a mountain of borrowed gold, political IOUs, and audacious financial leverage. Behind the myth of the undefeated general, the brilliant orator, and the man who broke the Roman Republic lies a quieter, more ruthless reality. Before he commanded legions, Caesar commanded debt. The image we are sold is the battlefield genius, the daring sieges in Gaul, the inevitable dictator. But that is not the whole truth. Caesar rose because he understood what most patricians of his era were too conservative to attempt. He understood that in a corrupt system, massive debt isn't a weakness. If you owe enough people enough money, your survival becomes their problem. And that is the story you were never taught, how a young Roman aristocrat, possessing a famous name but an empty vault, weaponized debt to buy the mob, finance a war, and ultimately purchase the greatest empire on earth. Rome in the 1st century BC was an oligarchy dressed in republican clothing. The political system was a meat grinder that required unimaginable wealth just to enter. To climb the cursus honorum, the ladder of public office, a Roman politician had to buy votes, throw lavish public games, and construct massive public works. There was no public campaign funding. You paid from your own pocket. If you won, you were eventually rewarded with a governorship of a province, where you could extract enough taxes and plunder to pay off your campaign debts and make a fortune. It was a high-stakes casino. Win and you rule the world. Lose an election and you are exiled, bankrupt, and destroyed. When a young Julius Caesar enters this arena, he has a problem. He has the pedigree of a god, claiming descent from Venus, but his family is relatively poor. He has political vision, but no monetary spine. He needs capital. So he does something radical. He doesn't just borrow, he borrows with an aggression that terrifies his peers. In 65 BC, Caesar is elected aedile, an office responsible for maintaining public buildings and organizing the public games. Most aediles throw decent games to win the favor of the mob. Caesar throws the most spectacular, financially ruinous gladiatorial games Rome has ever seen. He equips 320 pairs of gladiators in solid silver armor. He diverts rivers. He feasts the entire city. He spends money he does not have, borrowing at ruinous interest rates. The message to the Roman underclass was simple: Caesar is your provider. Confidence needs anchors, and Caesar's anchor was the mob. But the creditors were knocking. At one point, his debts were so massive that he was physically barred from leaving Rome to take up a governorship in Spain because his lenders feared he would flee. Enter Marcus Licinius Crassus, the richest man in Rome. Caesar turns to Crassus, not as a beggar, but as an investment opportunity. Caesar recognizes that Crassus has all the money in the world, but lacks the raw, blazing popularity that Caesar is cultivating. Crassus agrees to guarantee a massive portion of Caesar's debts, roughly 830 talents, the equivalent of tens of millions of dollars today. Why? Because Caesar had made himself too big to fail. If Caesar falls, Crassus loses his investment. By borrowing an astronomical sum from Rome's wealthiest oligarch, Caesar didn't become Crassus's slave. He made Crassus his shield. Caesar turned his own financial fragility into political armor. With his immediate debts cleared, Caesar forms the first triumvirate. He fuses his mob popularity, Crassus's boundless bank accounts, and Pompey the Great's military veterans into a political cartel that dominates the Republic. They get Caesar elected consul in 59 BC, but the consulship is only for 1 year. When it ends, Caesar knows his legal immunity will vanish, and his political enemies will prosecute him to seize his assets and destroy him. He needs a permanent solution. He needs a cash flow engine powerful enough to buy him an army, pay off the rest of his colossal debts, and insulate him from the Senate forever. He needs a war. Here is where Caesar is most ruthless. He secures a 5-year command in Gaul, modern-day France. We read about the Gallic Wars as a military masterpiece. They were, but fundamentally, the conquest of Gaul was the largest debt restructuring program in human history. Caesar treats war like a massive, violent private equity firm. The campaign is a revenue event. Gaul is rich in gold, timber, and above all, human beings. Over the next decade, Caesar ravages Gaul. He destroys hundreds of cities. He brings back tons of gold, so much gold that, when he eventually floods the Roman market with it, the value of gold in Rome plunges by 25%. But the real currency of the ancient world was flesh. Caesar captures an estimated 1 million slaves. He sells them by the tens of thousands to merchants who trail his army. The cash pours in. The front pays for the front, but the surplus pays for Rome. Caesar doesn't just hoard this wealth, he weaponizes it from across the Alps. While he is fighting in the mud of Gaul, his accountants are busy in Rome. He sends wagon loads of silver back to the capital to pay off his old debts. He buys up bankrupt senators. He funds a massive new forum in the heart of the city, paying an astronomical sum just for the land, putting thousands of Roman laborers to work. He doubles the pay of his own legionaries out of his own pocket, ensuring their absolute, unbreakable loyalty. He turns a conquered territory into a personal ATM. He proves that war, relentlessly executed, can bankroll a political machine that no domestic rival can match. But every system has a stress test. For Caesar, it is the Senate's panic. His enemies in Rome realize that Caesar has built an unstoppable financial and military flywheel. His wealth is staggering, his army is loyal to his coin, and the mob worships his generosity. In 49 BC, the Senate orders Caesar to disband his army and return to Rome as a private citizen. On paper, it is a legal command. In practice, it is a death sentence. If Caesar steps down, he loses his immunity. His enemies will drag him into court, strip him of his wealth, and banish him. This is the moment of truth. The Rubicon is a shallow, muddy stream, but crossing it was not just a military maneuver, it was a brutal financial calculation. Caesar knew that his entire empire of debt, patronage, and power would collapse the second he laid down his sword. He utters the die is cast and marches on Rome. The Republic's defenders, led by Pompey, are caught completely off guard by his speed. They flee the city, making a fatal error. They leave the state treasury behind in the Temple of Saturn. When Caesar enters Rome, he goes straight for the gold. A tribune tries to physically block the doors of the treasury, citing ancient laws. Caesar tells the man that it is easier for him to kill him than to threaten him. He breaks down the doors and seizes 15,000 bars of gold, 30,000 bars of silver, and 30 million sesterces in coin. The Republic's emergency fund, saved for centuries, is suddenly Caesar's personal checking account. He didn't just conquer the state, he liquidated it. And yet, and this is essential, Caesar doesn't just act as a pirate. Once he holds absolute power, he must transition from conquering a system to managing one. The Republic is drowning in a massive credit crisis because of the Civil War. Cash is hoarded, real estate prices have plummeted, and creditors are panicking. Caesar steps in with the cold logic of an administrator. He forces creditors to accept property as repayment at pre-war valuations, taking the sting out of the crash. He forgives a portion of rent for Rome's poorest citizens. He doesn't cancel all debt, which angers the radical populists, because he knows that wiping out all debt destroys the very concept of credit, which the empire needs to function. He mints his own coins, placing his own face on the denarius, the first living Roman ever to do so. He centralizes the calendar, moving Rome to the solar year, creating the Julian calendar. He standardizes the empire. He proves that law, money, and military force can be fused into a single dictatorial engine. The deeper you look, the more Caesar's era reads like a brutal manual for power. But if you stop the story here, you miss the warning baked into the triumph. Systems built on constant expansion, plunder, and the violent seizure of wealth share a hidden risk. They condition the state to need what victory provides. Caesar built a system where all power, all patronage, and all financial resolution flowed through one man. He became the sole bottleneck of the Roman world. When you centralize all power and wealth, you do not eliminate your enemies, you just force them to change their tactics. When the Senate could no longer outvote him, outspend him, or outfight him, they had only one option left. The Ides of March. 23 stab wounds on the floor of the Senate, the ultimate margin call on a life built on leverage. So what should you, the viewer, carry away beyond the history? First, that leverage is a weapon, but it forces your hand. Caesar used debt to buy his rise, but that debt forced him to conquer Gaul, and the threat of bankruptcy forced him to spark a civil war. When you owe enough, your choices are no longer your own. The math dictates your morality. If you understand how leverage traps people today, from corporate buyouts to national deficits, you can see who is truly making the decisions. Second, war and politics are capital-intensive industries. Caesar's story shows that durable power does not come from speeches, it comes from cash flow. The Romans knew that money forms the sinews of war. If you want to understand why a modern political movement succeeds or fails, do not read their manifesto, read their donor list. Look at their burn rate, follow the gold from Gaul to the Forum. Third, the ultimate collateral is power itself. When Caesar broke into the temple of Saturn, he proved that financial rules are illusions agreed upon by society. When someone arrives with swords, the rules evaporate. Money only has value in a system of laws. When the system breaks, the only currency that matters is force. Caesar grasped that coins and legionaries serve the same master, ambition. When the financial system serves the ambition can rewrite the world. Look around today. Leaders still use other people's money to fund their wars and buy their mobs. The mechanics have changed, from silver denarii to digital sovereign debt, but the human hardware is exactly the same. If there is a final image worth keeping, it is this: a young, heavily indebted patrician, standing before a cheering crowd, throwing gold he does not own to buy a loyalty he cannot yet afford. Caesar spent his life balancing on the razor's edge of ruin. When the political math and the financial math matched, he was unstoppable. When they diverged, he broke the world to make them align. History doesn't repeat, but if you don't understand the ledger behind the legend, it will conquer you all the same. If this gave you a new perspective, hit subscribe. The past left a trail. I'll show you where it leads.